Hi, how are you? Oh, These t-shirts are in bulk.
Yes.
These t-shirts are pretty bulk.
Is anybody? Do you have any of this?
democracy, what we're talking about here is, for instance, this year alone, $753 billion military budget. But apparently we're not supposed to ask, hey guys, what are you doing with all that money? What are you doing with that money really? And what Julian Assange made clear is that some of what they were doing with all that money was war crimes, was gratuitous civilian casualties up to 15,000, was torture. And so what is happening now in the case of Julian Assange is a classic displacement technique. Let's talk about the one who exposed the crime as opposed to talking about the crime itself. We should be talking about the crime and the criminals who committed the crime. Instead, all the attention has gone to Julian Assange, who had the audacity to do what journalists are supposed to do. Shine the light on what is really going on. When we have a situation like this, and it's so interesting because today is the 50th year anniversary of the publication of the Pentagon Papers by Daniel Ellsberg. 50 years ago today. There is a direct through line from Daniel Ellsberg to Julian Assange. Because if the US government could have put Daniel Ellsberg in jail and thrown away the key, they could have. Daniel Ellsberg was basically let go on a technicality. And he himself has joined with Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, ACLU, and so many other organizations, one of which will be represented by Chip Gibbons here today, to ask, to demand that Joe Biden withdraw his request for extradition of Julian Assange by the British government. One of the arguments that the government is using is, oh, he's not a journalist. Can you imagine an establishment that calls everyone at Fox News a journalist having a complaint about Julian Assange? Julian Assange has been treated so horribly for one reason. Julian Assange had to spend 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy. Julian Assange has now been almost 3 years in a harsh Belmarsh prison in the UK, where conditions are brutal, where he has been treated so harshly, up to 23 hours a day in his cell. And why is the US government doing this? Why is the US government coming after a Julian Assange the way they are on an arcane 1917 Espionage Act, not just to get to Julian Assange? The message is not just to Julian Assange. The message is to you and me and any journalist and any citizen who dares to ask, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? That is what is really going on here. And the technique that they use is classified information. We have in our audience here today a gentleman named Skip Kaltenheiser, who has written a marvelous article called The Man Who Knew Too Much. And one of the things he talks about in his article is how there are roughly 50 million pieces of classified information put out by the government every year. All they do, you're not supposed to be able to make a document classified, guys, just because it's inconvenient to you that somebody sees what's in it. You're not supposed to be able to make a document classified just because you don't want us to see it. But that is what they do, creating this perpetual fog. And so then they get on someone and they say, oh, it's a classified document, as though we are supposed to assume that if it's classified, it has to do with our security. It's a document being classified does not always have to do with our security. What is very obvious now is how often it has to do with things they just do not want us to see. The prosecution and the persecution of Julian Assange has already had a chilling effect on U.S. journalism. Ryan Grimm, who we'll talk about later, who will be speaking to us later today, has already said that when Merrick Garland is talking at his press conference about making sure that the press is free, that he mentions, and that reporters shouldn't even show up for the press conference unless he mentions the most important freedom of the press case in our time, and that is Julian Assange. This is not just about Julian Assange, it is about American democracy. Yeah. Once you start making it so that we can't know what they're doing, We don't get to see what they're doing, and everybody's afraid to even go there. Journalists are afraid to go there, people are afraid to go there, because we have it in our brains. Well, we know what they did to Julian Assange. It is time for the American people to draw our line in the sand. It is time for the American people to say, no, this is our red line. Stop right here. If President Obama, who himself came after Snowden, etc., if he himself had drawn a line when it came, in terms of First Amendment, when it came to Julian Assange, then Trump would say, oh, I love WikiLeaks, but then he got in office and boy, he told the line with the military establishment that did not want Julian Assange to be free. Why is Joe Biden now not turning away from the Trump policy? Why is he not returning to the Obama policy and stopping when it comes to Julian Assange? The UK government, there are parliamentarians in the UK government right now trying to take a stand, saying that the UK should not allow extradition of Julian Assange. Right now, the appeal does not necessarily have to be heard. This, as I'm sure Chip will be talking about, and Gabriel and John will be talking about, is a perfect moment. It's a perfect moment for Biden to walk this back. A perfect moment for them to let this die. A perfect moment to let Julian Assange go free. Thank you for being here today and helping us make it. And now, get into the specifics and listen to Chip Gibbons, who is head of an organization called Defending Rights and Dissent.
I'm actually my policy director. My boss is sitting in the audience. Otherwise, I would have accepted the head of the organization. But she's watching me right now. I have to correct her on that one. Thank you so much for inviting me. My organization, Defending Rights and Dissent, cares very strongly about the right to free expression, the right to a free press. And that's why we have consistently opposed the use of the Espionage Act when Obama was using it to go after whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning, like Edward Snowden, like Jeffrey Sterling, like John Kariaki. John Kariaki, by the way, is the only person to ever go to jail in this country in connection with the CIA torture program. He exposed it, which is the type of society we live in, as well as a case that's going on right now that many people haven't heard about Daniel Hale, the U.S. Army Air Force veteran who exposed the fact that at one period in Afghanistan, 90% of our airstrikes did not kill their intended target. Daniel Hale is right now in the Alexandria Detention Center awaiting sentencing under the Espionage Act, which he's pled guilty to, because it's nearly impossible to mount a defense under the Espionage Act. As Marianne mentioned, you're not supposed to classify documents that conceal bad conduct, but when Daniel Hale's attorneys, actually the prosecution before the attorneys could even raise the argument, asked the judge to bar Hale from challenging the classification of any documents on two grounds. First, that the classification is solely the domain of the executive branch and therefore a court cannot overrule it. And second, it doesn't matter under the Espionage Act whether the document was classified improperly or properly, it just matters it was classified. So if the government classifies a document illegally and you give that document to the press, you're just as guilty under the Espionage Act, which does not require the government to prove specific intent that you tried to harm the national security of this country or you tried to aid a foreign power. When Dan Ellsberg got to testify, he was asked why he leaked the Pentagon Papers, the judge stopped him. And the attorney said, I've never heard of a case where the defendant couldn't explain their actions. And the judge said, now you are. Because under the Espionage Act, it does not matter whether you intended to leak this information, intended to harm the United States or not, just that you gave this information out. And when you think about, and as a result, they actively gag the defense from mentioning why the person in question did so, or any information about what was leaked. Imagine you're on the Edward Snowden jury, and you hear this guy, pretend you've never heard of Edward Snowden, you hear this guy's been charged with espionage, and think, oh my God, he's a spy. What did he do? He released he released information about a classified program. What did Congress know about it? No, because the NSA perjured themselves to Congress. How did Congress react when they found out? They changed the law, a very tepid, meaningless, weak reform, but for the sake of his defense, would probably bring up the fact that they changed the law. A Ninth Circuit court found the law, found the NSA surveillance program to be illegal and likely unconstitutional, and you're asked to put this person in jail. Most people wouldn't probably convict in that case, which is why a jury is never allowed to hear this information. Marianne is absolutely right. The use of the Espionage Act is completely related to the US war machine, our national security state, and our role as an empire. The earliest use of the Espionage Act was to imprison people like Eugene Debs, who opposed the First World War under very different circumstances, under some amendments that no longer exist. But there is a bright through line between putting Eugene Debs in jail for saying, if war be right, let the people declare it. That was the criminal remark he made, and going after someone like Julian Assange, who believes that if lies can start wars, then peace can bring truth. And I want to say that I am personally very committed to Julian Assange's case because of my own background. I remember very vividly when our government lied to start a war of aggression against Iraq, and I started working with Iraq Veterans Against the War to help them organize talks to talk about the types of things that they saw and exposed, and the media ignored this. And when the Assange revelations came out, they were a big deal. And one day I was working at an NGO in New York, Center for Constitutional Rights, and a gentleman came into our office to talk to us. His name was Ethan McCord, and he is the person seen in the collateral murder video trying to rescue the child. And I sat in a room with the veteran from that video and watched the collateral murder video with him and listened to him talk about what that was like, what that experience was like living through, and how he had tried to alert people to the way the war really was and what was really going on in Iraq, and no one would listen, and how much it meant to him that video was published. And they put Chelsea in jail for doing that, and now they're trying to put Julian Assange in jail. And my solidarity is completely with you, Gabriel and John. I cannot imagine what it's like to have a loved one persecuted the way our government is despicably persecuting Julian. But this is a case about our First Amendment as well, right? If Julian can go to jail for printing documents, so can the New York Times. That's why Obama wouldn't cross the line. This is a case about the future of press freedom globally, right? Because if the US can go after Assange, who is not a US person, doesn't operate in this country, and charge him with espionage for doing journalism, they can go after anyone, anywhere in the world. And this is ultimately a case about our right to resist war and empire. This is a case about making it impossible for war to be right, let the people declare, because we will not even let the people know what's going on. And the Pentagon Papers, released 50 years today, the very first article they published was about the run-up to the Gulf of Tonkin, where the executive branch was waging clandestine military actions against North Vietnam and letting a U.S. ship go 8 miles off of North Vietnamese water. The commander of the ship asked them to stop, right? Because when you're doing those types of military actions, no one's likely to retaliate. And they then lie. They then claim that the torpedo hit the ship. Most likely not true. They lied about that. They told the North Vietnamese mentioned that the South Vietnamese government was attacking their islands, shelling their islands. Publicly, they told the people that wasn't true. Privately, in a classified session of Congress, they said, actually, that was true, but that was a lie as well, because it was, in fact, the CIA, not the South Vietnamese, doing this, and they already had the declaration of military use that was the Gulf of Tonkin resolution drafted. Wars that are based on lies lead to the evisceration of our democracy, because if a government is willing to lie to you to foment a war of aggression, they are absolutely willing to take away your right to free press, your right to free speech, and eviscerate your democratic rights at home.
I want to introduce you now to Gabriel Shipton and to his father. They live in Australia. It goes without saying what this family of Julian Assange has been through on a very personal level, as they have watched the treatment of their son and their brother. And what Gabriel was saying to me earlier is that this was the year when he felt that he needed to become active. He visited his brother recently in Belmarsh prison in England. And I think we're very fortunate, as uncomfortable as it is, to hear this personal testimony from Julian's family. Gabriel, welcome to Washington, D.C.
Chairmanship. Thank you, Defending Rights and Dissent, Andy, and Plus Boys and Poets. Thanks for having us here tonight. Thank you to you all for coming out. It's really been amazing the amount of support that we've seen since we've arrived in the country a couple of weeks ago. We were on the 4th stop on a 17 city tour across the month of June. And it's just been absolutely incredible, the support that's been coming out, and you can really feel the momentum building, from stop to stop. We're seeing more media coming out, we're seeing more people. It's been amazing, and I think the US is renowned for their hospitality, but to actually experience it, from the people is, it's something else. It really is. It's just been so hospitable, and we've been sort of walking on air in a way since we arrived. I can update you a little bit about Julian's case. So at the beginning of this year, beginning of January, Julian he won his extradition case. So he beat the US government who were trying to extradite him. The judge found that if he was to be extradited to the US, it would be tantamount to a sentence to death. Straight away, the US government signalled that they would be appealing that judgment, and a few days later, Julian his bail was rejected. So that's about 6 months ago now, and Julian's been this whole time, in Belmarsh maximum security prison, and we don't really know if there's going to be an appeal held or when there'll be an appeal. So he's been kept in this sort of limbo with no sentence, just on remand in a prison, not knowing when he can be released or when he's going to be able to be able to defend himself again. Last time I visited Julian was in October, at the end of last year. Since then, he hasn't been able to have any in-person visits. The prison's been in a total sort of COVID lockdown, so that's no in-person visits from his family, from his children, from even his lawyers. So he's got 2 young children who he's missing their birthdays and their celebrations and things like that. But so that's Julian's in his 3rd year of prison now, and his 12th year, coming up on his 12th year of detainment in one form or another. So that's 12 years where Julian hasn't been able to touch a blade of grass, or take his kids to the park to play, or even go shopping, even do the boring shit that that we all sort of find not, I'm sure he'd be happy or just joyful to just be able to do, something normal. Oh God, where was I going with that? Anyway, I might, should we get maybe Ryan to say something? Do you want to say something, Daddy?
This is on.
Yeah.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Thank you.
Just speak up a little bit. Yeah.
Again, is that better?
Yeah.
You both have soft voices. Thank you for your support. Thank you for the hospitality. As Gabriel mentioned, it's very generous and unflagging, unflinching support. I remember a concert called Rolling. It just rolls on. It's great. Just a few things. In Australia, every time there's an election, everybody jumps up and down and says, look, we've got to have a Bill of Rights. We've got to have a First Amendment. The First Amendment and the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution are novels and envied around the world and copied. Of course, they're now embraced in most European legislation, those 2 things. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is enshrined in the United Nations, and the chair of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 was Eleanor Roosevelt. And these elements of the United States Constitution, the civilizational goal, you can't do better. Why they're considering abandoning the First Amendment is a really profound question that you guys got to look at. Gabriel and I, of course, are one of the United States defending the First Amendment because of two, well, fundamental reasons, fundamental understandings that we have. One, I'll develop this a bit. One, without knowledge, you can't ever be free. And the constant engagement in gaining knowledge brings freedom.
Yes.
That's the thing. With the First Amendment, the quality of the polity, that's the quality of us and our understanding of what governments do and how our society is unfolding in time. That quality increases with the exposure of information and the sifting of, like you sift gold, the sifting of information and discussion amongst ourselves raises the level of being and the level of understanding of the entire polity and bringing about a more civilized circumstance of life. This was a declaration made by Jefferson and an understanding of the Enlightenment which we all defend. Next. The revelations that Chelsea Manning supplied and were published in searchable form by WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, they demonstrate to us two things. One is that it's really important, vital to life and vital to civilization and vital to community to know what your government's doing, what's cooking in their offices, what are they discussing, what are they putting together, and why are they putting it together, and our involvement in what they prescribe for us. What's cooking is our question, and that is supplied in those revelations. One of them in the cables. This is really important. I can divide this into three. Leaks stop wars. That's one. Leaks stop wars. In 2006, a group of soldiers embroiled in the murderous urge that soldiers do when they're paranoid, invaded a house and murdered the entire occupants, the mum and the dad and the kids, the uncles, aunties, the entire extended family. Contemplating this crime, they ordered in an airstrike on the house and obliterated all evidence of those lives from the earth forever. This was revealed in the cables. It was read by the Iraqi parliament, and the Iraqi parliament gathered together their courage. Takes a bit when you've been invaded. Gathered together their courage and refused, point blank, refused to sign the Status of Forces Agreement. As a consequence, the United States and its allies, one of the allies is my country, Australia, had to remove their troops. Okay. Stops wars. Leaks stops wars. If we knew beforehand what they're up to, leaks prevent wars because people are peaceful. For the most part, we're peaceful. We get a bit of prosecution with it. We like peace. We can get on with things. We can have a bit of fun. We can have meetings like this where we can bring forth together ideas that deepen our understanding of life and deepen our understanding of our community. These things are really vital to existence, decent existence. 2, leaks bring justice. The Guantanamo Bay files were examined by a great American lawyer named Clive Stafford Smith, and he established an NGO called Reprieve, and founded upon those Guantanamo Bay files, was able to bring about the freedom of many people who were locked up there for no reason whatsoever, just that they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Among those that were in those 800 people were 22 children, and he was able to bring about freedom for some of those. So 2 is it brings justice. 3, the Figura company, a corporation that was charged with disposing of waste, found a shortcut. So a shipload of e-waste was dumped off the coast of Africa, destroying the village life of the coastal villages and killing 144 people and ruining the communities because not only those that died, they were sickened as well. That was published in WikiLeaks and allowed those people to go about seeking justice, and the corporation being punished for these crimes. But just one more. This concerns the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom was in charge of the Chagos Islands. The Chagos Islanders, in order to provide an Air Force base for the United States Air Force called Diego Garcia, the entire population was removed forcibly and dumped in Mauritius. But the publication of the cables, those Mauritians and their lawyers, those Chagos Islanders and their lawyers were able to bring a case into the International Court of Justice, which they won. The United Kingdom appealed, and the appeal failed. So there's 4 cases where leaks, the publication of those leaks, allowed us to participate, to bring about justice, to stop a war, and to free prisoners wrongly held. If you can indulge me for a second, I'll give you one more example of the power and humanity that's involved in this. You've all seen, I imagine, the Collateral Murder video. Before that was released, Kristen Hamilton, who's the editor now, and back then was the chief reporter of WikiLeaks, travelled. That was 2011, so Sadr City in Baghdad was a hotbed of murderous revolution against the occupation. Kristen took his life in his hands and went to attempt 2 things. One is to name the dead. Naming the dead for us is very important. Very, very important. Antigone, the most beautiful woman to come down to us from heaven, took her life was forfeit because she insisted upon giving her brother the funeral rites. So it's really important to us. So Kristen and Julian went about attempting to name those 11 people you saw that were murdered in Collateral Murder. They were unable to, but they did manage to see the relatives of the 2 journalists and inform them of what actually happened to their uncle. So that's an indication of the humanity of the people behind WikiLeaks just to make sure that you understand that those people who have brought you this information are humane. They're not computer nerds, you know, they have children, they have fathers and brothers, and their concerns are humane. Yeah. So I think I've said enough, and I thank you for your patience you've shown me.
Thank you very, very much. In a moment, we are going to hear from Ryan Grimm. But before we do, and after that, we'll answer any questions that you have for anyone on the panel. Before that, I want to ask you, Gabrielle, for people who are watching on live stream, what cities are left on the tour so that people can know what cities you're going to be in for people to hear more information?
Yeah, sure. Well, our whole itinerary is available on home run number 4 Julian.com. So that's home run number 4 Julian.com. Tomorrow we're off to Columbus, Ohio. We're going to Chicago, Milwaukee, Denver, San Francisco, Oakland, LA, and then we'll end the tour back here in Washington again at the end of the month.
And I hope all of you will take it upon yourselves to let people know about the tour, to let people know about Julian, all the wonderful articles that have been written. What we want is to make so much noise about this that it's inconvenient for the Biden administration. They've got so much to think about. Let's make this just one thing that would be best off their plate. If it remains on their plate, the U.S. government is trying to indict and to convict Julian Assange and to put him in prison for a sentence that would call for 175 years. So thank you for participating, and let's all of us do our part to help spread the word. And now we have a video. We have Ryan Grimm. So Ryan, welcome.
Yeah, Marianne, Chip, Gabriel, John, thanks so much for doing this. And I wish I could be there in person, but I did want to say a couple of things about what Attorney General Merrick Garland has been doing lately. You know, you may have seen that he is in the process of creating some new policies where he says he's going to roll back the Trump administration's, kind of war on leakers and war on the press. He doesn't mention that, this began, this goes back many administrations, but was very much ramped up under the Obama administration. But the fact that Garland is now talking like this, I'm hopeful creates such an incredibly strong contradiction that the weight of the hypocrisy, if it's pushed enough by the press and by the public, could actually bring a little bit of change. It's been reported that he's going to be meeting as he's thinking through this new policy with reporters at the New York Times and at the Washington Post. And as Marianne said earlier, I had suggested that they should refuse to meet with him while we're in the midst of this contradiction where he's claiming that he's going to end the war on journalism and war on leak prosecutions, while at the same time prosecuting one of the most accomplished journalists of an entire generation. So a memo would be wonderful, but more important would be to actually end the prosecution that's currently underway and drop the extradition request. There's nothing stopping him from doing that. I think pressure on Ron Klain, the chief of staff, would be useful, because Joe Biden himself does not have the right inclinations on this question. If you remember from the very beginning, I believe he called Julian something like a cyber terrorist. So this is not somebody who is kind of remotely sympathetic to this to begin with. But I could also see the argument for these reporters taking the meeting but refusing to talk about anything during the meeting other than this prosecution. Now, I don't suspect that they're going to do this. And part of this comes down to, personal and professional jealousies and hostilities. But I think part of it is also that there is a genuine denial that a lot of reporters have today. They do not want to believe that their government is prosecuting one of the most prominent journalists in a generation. They just simply don't want that to be true, because that would require you to reevaluate a lot of the things that journalists think about their government, and it would require them to behave in a more confrontational manner with their government than they may be comfortable with. So I think they prefer to just tell themselves that Julian Assange is something other than a journalist, and by that method kind of sidestep it. But when the kind of public opinion of journalists is at an all-time low, it's just not. This is not a moment that journalists can lose this fight. And so, John and Gabriel, I'm deeply grateful for what you're doing around the country for Julian, and I want that to succeed as quickly as possible. I want to succeed not just for Julian, but for all of journalism, because if they and we can't win this case now, we're going to regret it as an industry, and I think we're going to regret it a lot sooner than we might think. And so thank you again for everything that you're doing. And Gabriel, I'd be curious how much you could tell us about how Julian is just doing kind of personally right now.
Well, as I was saying before, he's the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer, took 2 doctors to see Julian in the prison, and they spent quite some time with him, assessing him. From Nils Melzer then released a report with those doctors' findings, and they found that Julian was suffering from long-term effects of psychological torture. So he's definitely not the man he once was. He's been suffering under this psychological torture for many years. And I think it'll take some time, after this is all over, for him to sort of get back to his usual self. I think we're all sort of, it's the situation is dire, which is why we're here really. It's because if Julian doesn't get out, he will die. What we're seeing is basically the slow motion murder of a journalist before our eyes. Nils Melzer, he says something interesting. He says people are tortured in the town square for everyone to see, so they're made an example of, so that everybody else knows that if you do these actions, this will happen to you. So I think that's Nils Melzer's assessment is spot on there. Julian is being made an example of, so that everybody knows that if you do this sort of reporting, if you expose structural power, that this is what's going to happen to you.
Anything else, Ryan, that you want to say?
No, other than just thank you, and I really do think that pressure on Democrats in Congress and pressure on not just Ron Klain but other senior advisors around Biden. He has to, like you said, he has to keep feeling that this is a live issue. They would love for this to just go away. And as you said earlier, despite Obama's record, this was a bridge too far, even for him. Because he felt like he had something that he called the New York Times problem. That if he prosecuted Assange, that he would also have to prosecute the New York Times, because the New York Times and Assange, collaborated on a number of projects, and also they functionally do the same things. They obtain information and they publish it, and they couldn't internally overcome this New York Times problem, and so they sidestepped and decided not to go forward with the prosecution. So that hasn't changed. The only thing that has changed is that Trump did their dirty work for them. But there's absolutely no rationale for them to go forward with this. And as long as they have to keep being confronted with that, there's still hope. Oh, I lost you.
Any questions questions that anybody has, raise your hand. I don't know, do we have somebody coming over to you with a microphone? Yes, okay. Here, and then that gentleman back there. Yes, sir.
Good. Thank you. I'd like to ask two questions. First off, I hear this is true. Has WikiLeaks ever issued a retraction? I believe I've heard that they never have. And if that's so, that's obviously a record that any journalistic entity would love to claim. My second question has to do with the Spanish trial and Craig Murray, but really it was about what I had heard. The reason for the timing of the snatching of Julian from the Ecuadorian embassy is that the surveillance that they had been conducting showed he was about to be issued an honorary diplomatic passport. Why did was that true, and why did the Ecuadorian government stop that if that was true?
So WikiLeaks, they had, I think it's they do have a perfect record, and no matter which. There was an operation called Operation Pelican, which was a UK operation that was engaging with the Ecuadorian government to get Julian out of the embassy. So that operation had been running, I think, for a couple of years. There's some good reporting on it on Declassified UK. So that the UK government was courting the Ecuadorian government, convincing them that Julian should be ejected from the embassy. The Ecuadorian government had an issue in that Julian was very popular, or is very popular in Ecuador. He was. So they had an issue where if they were to eject Julian from the prison, that there would be a backlash amongst their population. So what Matt Cannard found from Declassified UK was that there was then a media campaign launched to sort of make Julian seem like he was a bad house guest. So they said things like he's not looking after his cat, these sort of things. But the whole operation was to change the public perception, to make the Ecuadorian people feel that Julian should be ejected from the embassy. So this was an ongoing operation that is now out in the open. I think the gentleman who was in charge of it was boasting about leading the operation. I think his name is Duncan. He's a UK public servant. But yeah, he was boasting about leading the operation and how successful they were and actually been able to change the narrative in Ecuador and snatch Julian out of the embassy, which was basically illegal.
There's a gentleman towards the back there. You had your hand up.
Hi, thanks for organizing this, and Mr. Shipton for being here especially. I have a question about how WikiLeaks is discussed by human rights organizations like Amnesty and Human Rights Watch. So when the directors of those organizations like Ken Roth are asked in interviews about the contribution of WikiLeaks from things like the African war logs, they almost always say that they already knew this, or that WikiLeaks was just confirming what they already knew. And my question is, why do these human rights, the mainstream human rights community, always disclaim the significance of WikiLeaks contributions? And how do you think that affects Julian's ability to gain sympathy from these organizations, which, say what you will about them, they have an important impact on the public opinion? Yeah.
I don't know anything about those specific remarks, but as someone who is in a civil liberties organization and has worked with human rights organizations, with press freedom informations, to oppose the prosecution of Assange, I would say the human rights community is unanimous in its belief that Julian Assange should not be prosecuted under the Espionage Act, should not be extradited to the US. Defending Rights to Dissent, along with Freedom of the Press Foundation, was one of, I think, 115 groups who sent a letter to the then acting Attorney General under the Biden administration, asking them to drop the charges, drop the extradition. I can't speak to specific comments that Ken Roth has made. I know he makes a lot of remarks on Twitter, but I don't work at Human Rights Watch, and I can't answer for that. But I can say that in the press freedom community, in the civil liberties community, in the human rights community, there is unanimity around Assange was not be prosecuted. That doesn't mean everyone likes Assange or hasn't made remarks that I would disagree with about him. And I would also say that one of the things that Defending Rights to Dissent we try to do when we defend whistleblowers and journalists like Julian Assange indicted under the Espionage Act, because opposing the Espionage Act is one of our top priorities at the moment. In the last Congress, we were able to get Espionage Act reform legislation introduced, is to talk about not just the whistleblowers, not just the journalists, but to talk about the significance of their revelations and talk about the significance of what we've learned from them. And I would say that Chelsea Manning's disclosures, which WikiLeaks and Julian Assange published, are of immense historical importance.
May I ask a question myself there? What about Reality Winner?
Reality Winner, Defending Rights to Dissent has called for her to be freed. We have opposed her prosecution. On World Whistleblower Day, I don't remember the year, but it was right when she was indicted. We went to the Department of Justice and we dropped off petitions and we held a big Free Reality Winner sign. We have put together petitions calling for a pardon for Reality Winner. We've also done the same for Edward Snowden, for Chelsea Manning, for Daniel Hale. We used to do the same for Terry Albury, the FBI whistleblower, but he apparently does not want a pardon, as he considers his conviction under the Espionage Act to be a badge of honor. But anyone who has been charged under the Espionage Act for giving information to a journalist, Defending Rights and Dissent has defended them and called for Congress to amend the Espionage Act so that the US government must show specific intent to harm national security and to allow a public interest defense and to stop gagging defense. We've also called on the Department of Justice to not bring these cases, right? No one is making them do this. They don't have to do this. In fact, for decades, this was extremely abnormal. Daniel Ellsberg and Anthony Russo, who leaked the Pentagon Papers, were the first two people charged under the Espionage Act for being whistleblowers. There's one whistleblower in the 1980s, I believe Samuel Morris, and I'm blanking on his name, who was charged, and Bill Clinton, at the urging of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, very mainstream people, pardons him on the grounds that it is so bizarre to charge a whistleblower under the Espionage Act. So this was dormant forever. And then Obama came in, and his administration prosecuted more people under the Espionage Act than every single administration combined. So that is the position of my organization. They should stop doing this.
Yeah, I think one important thing to note as well is that Julian is being prosecuted under the Espionage Act, but Julian isn't actually a whistleblower. He's a publisher. So this is the first time that the Espionage Act is being used against a publisher. So it's been defended in the past against whistleblowers, but this is a totally new use of the Espionage Act. So the Trump administration, the Trump DOJ, came up with this sort of gaming of the Espionage Act and turned it against a publisher for the first time. So I think what we've seen and what we've seen support from opinion in the New York Times, editorial, Washington Post, is that these organisations know that when they're doing national security reporting now, they have to worry about an Espionage Act charge. So if a story comes onto their desk and it's based on classified information from a leaker, then they say, well, we're a publisher, Julian Assange is a publisher, Julian Assange has an Espionage Act prosecution, we could potentially have an Espionage Act prosecution. So there's that, it's, even though this isn't going forward, it's still not heard or the precedent hasn't been set, there is already a chilling, this chilling factor. And another way that sort of has an effect is going down the ladder. So it goes from the publisher and then it goes to the leakers. So if you're a leaker and you have information, you see something that's wrong, you believe that the information should be public. Why would you take it to a publisher when you know that they're not going to publish it because they're scared of getting an Espionage Act prosecution? So it's really, you know, it's a silencing, you know, across the board, not just from publishers, but also from potential leakers.
And I'd add one thing. There is a former NSA lawyer who has been running around saying the exact thing we are, with the opposite conclusion, which is that Assange's case sets a precedent for prosecuting journalists. Usually these sort of sycophants and apologists of the national security state say, no, this sets no such precedent. But there's an NSA former lawyer who's writing articles saying the Assange case sets a precedent to prosecute journalists, and this is good, and we should prosecute journalists. When Daniel Hale pled guilty under the Espionage Act for exposing the murderous nature of the U.S. drone program, this particular NSA lawyer's name I'm blanking on was on Twitter saying it's too bad they didn't indict Jeremy Scahill as well, because the Assange prosecution would give them the precedent to do so.
You have a question back here? We have a gentleman in the way
Yeah,
back.
yes,
and then over here. Yes.
I actually equate Julian Assange to Jesus' brother. And I was wondering if you've heard this comparison, because it's pretty much the same script. He's turning over the money changers' tables and he's telling the truth, just like Jesus. You know, I actually think he's as good as Jesus. I really do. And I pray for his safety and pray for him every day. And I was just wondering if people make this comparison to Jesus. I mean, it's the same story.
Well, I really hope that Julian doesn't die on the cross.
Well, that's what they're doing. I do too. And that's what they're doing, and we're allowing it. And, you know, days we've had 10 years.
I think we have time to stop it, so there's still time to stop it.
I know this puts you in a curious position, being the third brother. But I think I think Julian Assange is Jesus' brother. I truly do. And he's doing the same script, and he's turning over the money changers, and he's bringing truth to this country. And God bless him. And thank you.
One thing we know they have in common is that they are deeply inconvenient to the authorities of their time. Yes, ma'am. Right in here.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Jordan, the DC Metro for Assange group, and we've been going out to DuPont Circle past month or so, past months, and educating people. Particularly this area, which I would consider. I grew up in the Northern Virginia area for most of my life, and it's the most propagandized region of America. And you know, the biggest problem we have is just that the narrative of who Julian Assange is, like, he's just been completely erased. And so what we do is we try to educate people, and that's what we know we can do. But I'm just sitting here and I'm just like, there needs to be more. This is an urgent issue. And so my question is, because I've heard a lot talked about public opinion, like our goal here is for sure to put pressure on these politicians to act, and I just don't. Is there anything that we have solutions-wise that is more, that we can do more than putting public opinion? Is there some sort of leverage that we have that people who are in, you know, I don't like fully just depending on other politicians to do their job, but it's just, is there anything else we can do other than appealing to people's humanity right now? Because I mean, is there any form of leverage that we can move through, maybe Congress or any? I mean, because it's urgent, and I would love to have this big swelling, movement. And us marching through DC, and I'm not saying that's impossible, but it's just like, I know I've been a part of movements for a while, and that stuff takes so much time. And, so is there anything solutions-wise other than, influencing public opinion or, that we can do?
I think, so I was just talking about this, to Marianne about this earlier. There's a sort of unique opportunity at the moment. Merrick Garland is meeting with the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN next week to talk about the Trump era attack, the Trump era DOJ attacks against journalists. So what we can do is we can everyone get in the comments of the New York Times and the Washington Post and tell them that you want Assange brought up, that you care about this Assange case and that it matters to you, and you want the New York Times and the Washington Post to bring up the Assange case in their meeting with Merrick Garland about press freedoms, because it is the biggest press freedom case. Another thing we can do that we've had some success overseas is really just act locally, like get in touch with your congressperson, or something that happens in Australia is that we have a localized petition where constituents of an area will all get together. They'll get their neighbours, they'll get local friendly businesses all to get together to sign a petition to take to the congressperson of that area. And so once you've got that petition together, then you've got all these people's numbers, you've got their email addresses, and you have a group. And that group can then, make a Facebook group, work together to tell their congressperson that this is an issue that you care about and that you want something done on. And then those congresspeople can take that to Washington to hear and, make it uncomfortable for those who are pursuing this prosecution.
What's the website to get that?
To get
that petition.
we can put it up. I don't think there is a template. There is a template up for the Australian ones, but we can get a template put up on AssangeDefense.org. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that, the cause of Julian Assange to transcend partisan and ideological lines. But if you consider yourself to be on the left, I would talk to your fellow lefties about this case, because if you look around the world and who Julian Assange's international defenders are, it includes Jeremy Corbyn, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, Lula, Morales, Yanis Varoufakis, whereas their sort of equivalents in the US, in the US Congress, have been really rather embarrassingly silent on this issue. And there is this sort of unfortunate narrative that still lingers from the 2016 election that I think for a lot of people on the left has wrongfully, to be clear, complete, this is a wrong narrative, has sort of wrongfully led them to drop some of their support for him. And I think it's important to educate people about why is it that Jeremy Corbyn and Lula and Varoufakis supports Julian Assange, and why are the squad not being more outspoken about this case?
I don't think you should make assumptions either about your congressman or your senator being Democrat or Republican. You can call the Congressional Switchboard at 202-224-3121. Say you want to make a constituent call to your congressman, to your senator, and say that you want the United States to withdraw its request for Julian Assange's extradition to the United States. Make noise. I was talking to another woman earlier, and women are always taught that if anybody's trying to mug you, just start yelling and don't stop. And that's really how we have it. Whether Twitter, Facebook, your Instagram, your neighbor, your friends, there are so many good articles that have been written now. You're coming to events like this, finding out more and more of the information. Just start talking about Julian Assange and do not stop. Yes, the lady at the end of the back.
Yeah, I wanted to get a sense of what what is what's happening outside the United States.
So you want to get a sense of what's happening outside the United States?
You can hear me. I guess one of the scariest things about this case is that he's not even an American citizen. And so I wanted to understand what people are saying and going outside
the country, especially in Australia. I mean, in terms of what are Australians saying about that? What is the dynamic there in terms of the officials, journalists, just everyday citizens who are saying that no, our resident or our citizen should not be bound by U.S. law. It's not even a resident of our citizen.
Well, I mean, there's movements all over the world. So in Australia, there's a parliamentary group, so a grouping of 26 parliamentarians from all parties, and they are, they're supporting Assange group. We're adding a parliamentarian there, probably one a month. So it's about 15% or something like that. 15% of the parliamentarians in Australia are a member of this group. The main opposition party in Australia has put out statements supporting Assange. The Shadow Attorney General has, put out a statement saying, enough is enough. This sort of prosecution has to end. So there's a huge movement building in Australia for this to end. Likewise, in the UK, just yesterday, a group of 24 UK MPs wrote a letter to Biden. That's UK MPs from both major parties, the Tories and the Labor Party. Includes Jeremy Corbyn, who used to be the leader of the Labor Party, David Davis from the Tories. He was a cabinet member under Theresa May. So they wrote a letter to Biden during the G7. So Biden is in the UK, and they've written a letter to him saying, for the sake of freedom of expression and free press, you have to, can you drop this prosecution? Likewise in France, there's a group. In Italy, there's a group. In Spain, in Germany, there's a group with all members. Even the leading party in Germany is has parliamentarians that are members of the supporting Assange group. So this is, it's a global movement, and we're hoping to see that sort of the swelling of support happen here as well. With Congress people starting, potentially starting a group here. That would be, an incredible outcome for this country.
Any other questions here?
I can add also that the Council of Europe has made a declaration of support of Julian and as a protected journalist. The High Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe have made a support declaration. The Austrian government has made a support declaration. Every one of those nations that's in the Council of Europe, there's 44 nations. So the first to realise that it was a global problem and make that public was James Goodall. He's now 90 years of age, but very sharp. He's the attorney or lawyer representing the New York Times at the time of Daniel Ellsberg publication of the Pentagon Papers. He stated clearly to us that this is a global problem. And as you can see from what I've just said and what Gabriel said, there's also a global phenomenon of a rising tide of support institutionally and among people.
Chip, do you have any final words?
I think that this case is an immensely important case for all of the reasons that have been brought out tonight. I think that the future of press freedom hinges on it. I think that Julian is being retaliated against because he has exposed the crimes of the U.S. government. Unfortunately, it is a new low for the U.S. to go so far as to prosecute a journalist as opposed to just the journalist's source. And it is a precedent that, if set, can be used broadly against journalists broadly. But I think we know it's mostly going to be used against adversarial journalists who challenge the U.S. national security state, who challenge the U.S. empire. And I think we have to take on the Espionage Act in its entirety in this country. And, like I said, my organization had a legislation introduced in the last Congress that's no longer there that would have made it a requirement that the U.S. government had to prove specific intent to harm the U.S. national security. Representative Kahan and Senator Wyden had other legislation that would have tackled Julian's case more closely. And I would just say, if you're concerned about these issues, please visit us at rightsandcent.org. We've also launched a new podcast called Primary Sources Podcast, where we want to look firsthand at the plight of whistleblowers, journalists, and truth tellers, mostly in their own words. The first episode launched today and had Daniel Ellsberg on it, and the second episode will have James Goodale on it, and I think you all got flyers about it. I am so honored to be on this panel. I'm not sure how I got invited with such a distinguished group of people, but it is an honor.
So we have one more question.
I'm a former American diplomat who was forced out of the State Department 50 years ago for being against the war in Vietnam. Under international law, a country can only go to war if they are in the imminent position of being invaded, which means that every war since World War II of the United States has been an illegal war, whether it's against Koreans or Vietnamese or Afghans or Dominicans or Panamanians or Canadians and so on. And maybe I'm kind of naive, but to me, a democracy really depends on an informed electorate. And the higher up you go in the corporate state and the national security state, the more secret everything is. So the most important issues are the most secret. We are not an informed electorate. We are not, in a sense, a real democracy because of that. And to me, the face of democracy, what does democracy look like? It looks like the face of Assange and of Manning and of Snowden and so on. And to me, the greater that they can be, they can bring out the information that we, the electorate, needs, the better it is for the world and for America. Thank you.
There was nothing naive about that at all. It was very, very important. How can we be an informed electorate if journalists are not allowed to inform us? So thank you very much, Ed.
Yeah, I wanted, I think Chip touched on it, but can you elaborate more about the rumor out there about Julian and association with the alt-right and white nationalism? Because a couple of people actually refused to come to this event today that I know. They said, "Oh, he's associated with that." What are some of the talking points that we should use to dispel that myth? Anybody?
I've never heard anything about that.
You never heard of that?
That there's a
There's a connection with Julian with the alt-right.
I know that
White
some
nationalists.
I know that some liberals make that claim.
This yet another one of those smears that doesn't deliver our attention to the actual problems that prevail at the time. You know, for example, the drawdown of troops from Afghanistan, or the continuing support of, I'll leave that out. No, it prevails constantly that immediately people begin to pay attention to what the actions of government are. They move in one way or another against the people who are bringing that information. And as a consequence of that, they attempt to lower the quality of that information. Well, get with the program here. Every single release from WikiLeaks over the last 11 years has been without any taint of falsity. That's the thing. Not Julian Assange might be all right. Oh, for God's sake, what else did they accuse him? You know, for example, he didn't feed his cat.
I mean,
He didn't change his socks. He rode a skateboard up and down the hallway. It's a comedy, just cruel comedy. The man is now in the 13th year, it'll be soon the 13th year, of arbitrary detention. And they say, well, right, it's grotesque. It's beyond another thing that is grotesque. Sometimes you hear them say, oh, he endangered lives. You hear a spokesperson from the executive, from the Pentagon, who's organised the destruction of 7 countries over the last 20 years and the murder of a few million people and the creation of, according to Brown University, 37 million refugees. You hear that spokesman say he endangered lives. It's grotesque. It's beyond comprehension. It's so vile that these people who administer, organize, supply the logistics for the destruction of one community after the other say, oh, he's all right. Oh, he didn't feed the cat or whatever. I apologize for my strength of feeling on this.
I mean, Andy, you are correct. That is what I was alluding to when I said there are some false narratives that have percolated on some parts of the U.S. liberal left. With friends like the ones you have, they might even be the same friends I have who are doing this. I don't know. I mean, I would try to ask them why do they think Corbyn and Varoufakis and Lula and Morales and Amnesty International and the Progressive International all support him. I would also, I think at some point you have to just sort of stop talking about the smears and start talking about this is a huge case about press freedom. Whether or not you like Julian Assange on an individual level, it doesn't matter, and this will undermine our right to press freedom. And I think also the most important thing is to talk about what Julian is being prosecuted for for exposing. So if you think the fact that he exposed the fact that the U.S. State Department worked with private corporations to bully Haiti into lowering their minimum wage, or that they were keeping innocent people in Guantanamo, or that they were murdering journalists in Iraq. You think those are alt-right things, right? Really? Come on now. So I think some people might be a little bit sort of have drunk too much of the Kool-Aid, and I think in those cases, just talk to them about what he exposed, and if that doesn't work, talk to them that we are talking about the fate of the First Amendment, and that, that's what we have to think about.
We are talking about revelations concerning torture, the gratuitous civilian casualties up to 15,000, and known war crimes. Let's have some proportion and perspective here. Anybody else have any questions? Or Ryan, do you have anything further you'd like to say?
Yeah, I would just agree really strongly with Chip. A lot of those people that are going to repeat a lot of the smears about Assange aren't going to be persuaded on those facts. So you have to move, I think, the conversation to the place of principle, and you have to just tell them, like, look, it's not useful or helpful if you stand up for a principle only when it's easy. Like it's only useful and it's only courageous to stand up for that principle when it's not easy for you to do it, because the state is always going to try to find the cases where they think they can get the most public sympathy and then roll back freedoms and roll back rights and never ratchet it backwards. When you give ground, you don't get it back. And so you can believe whatever you want about him, but what he did is obtain and publish information for the public, and you have to stand up no matter who his friends are, for that right, because that's a fundamental bedrock principle.
And no matter who our friends are.
Exactly.
And secretiveness, government secretiveness, and shining the light on what the government is really doing should not even be a left-right issue. And Republicans should be just as concerned about it as Democrats, and sometimes make it clear that they are. I think that we have, is there one other, you have one other?
I just want to say, for some reason I can't use the microphone. But I just want to say that I think that you just have to be really clear that, I think Chip said it earlier, that here in DC especially, there's so many people who associate Julian Assange with Hillary Clinton by losing the 2016 election. And so for this whole Democratic class of people, corporate Democrats, whatever you want to call them, that they are stuck on that narrative, even 4 years later or 5 or 6 years later. And so when they say all right, that's what it's all about. And it's not, and for that whole group of people who are still spouting that on MSNBC and CNN or whatever, you're not going to convince them. And it's really scary that a person losing the election can really put a person in jail, basically, for this many years, and then really just upset the whole global imperative to have freedom of the press. That's what really is. That's what really is. And I think that we have to be really clear about that here in DC. And that's why even the squad is not coming out for Julian Assange.
Right.
And you have, the Democratic Party cannot hold Julian Assange hostage forever because of their lives.
I will add that, I don't think the squad has been as outspoken on this issue as they should be. I will add that AOC did go on The Intercept with Jeremy Scahill, and he pinned her down into saying that she did not think Julian Assange should be charged under the Espionage Act. It took her a lot longer to say that than she should have, but I do think there is an opening there, and I do know that in the past she made unsolicited spontaneous remarks about Reality Winner's case, as well as calling for Chelsea Manning's case, and AOC has said, and I believe she's one of the only members of Congress to say this, that whistleblowers should not be charged under the Espionage Act. Obviously, she is reluctant to comment on the Assange issue, and it's clear from the fact that Jeremy Scale finally got an answer out of her. She knows what the right position is, and I think it's fine to pressure her, and I think we should pressure her, but I also think she is potentially more of our friend on this issue than she's letting on.
Well, she should be more bold about it.
I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that.
I want to thank all of you. I want to thank.
Can I do a follow-up question to this one, just very quick? In terms of timings, like, I absolutely agree that, in general, the platform is, you cannot prosecute somebody for creating a platform, for revealing the truth. But there is some notion also that Julian controls the timings of the release to influence certain issues. Is there any thought on this as his family? Do you think that's deliberate, that he waits on some information and releases when it's convenient?
I think this feeds into what we've been talking about, really, and that this is about principles, and whether you believe that, whether you believe in a free press or not. All these other things are sort of distractions, and we need to stay focused on the issue, which is that Julian has been charged as a publisher under the Espionage Act, first publisher ever to be charged under the Espionage Act.
And also, all journalists do that. All publishers do that.
I want to thank everybody. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank you, Andy Shalal, the marvelous platform and space that you provide for us. I thank everybody here for the information that you heard today, for the information that's on the internet. You take the issue now. It's for all of us to take it from here. Read, find out, know the information, and share it with others. And I just want to close by reminding all of you that the real issue at this point is democracy itself. Yes. We need a pro-democracy movement here in the United States. Yes, the specter of global authoritarianism is upon us, and it is headquartered here as much as anywhere else. And at this point, it's important for all of us to remember that democracy does not just die in one big bang. Democracy dies one step at a time. And freedom of press, and the denial of the freedom of press, and the denial of the right of the American people to know what our government is doing in our name is a big step. Let's be Americans. Let's not let them do it. Thank you very much.